In this video, I'll be teaching you how to do one of the most unique combinations of a GPT and an external database that works with the GPT, meaning you're giving a custom version of ChatGPT custom memories. The use case we'll be doing that with in this video is a journaling GPT, where every time you interact with it, it looks into the database, brings in any journal entries from the past 7 days, to come up with custom questions to ask you today. Then you type out the answers and it stores them back in the database. And the way we're doing this is with an automation. So what practically happens is we have a make automation in the middle. And when you engage the GPT, make automation gets the data into your GPT. So you get a custom start. And once you're done journaling, you send your journal entry to the automation, which stores it in the database. Now, to be clear, this is not a beginner level automation, but I believe this is well worth teaching because you can customize it to do other things than journals. Essentially, I'm showing you how to build a custom chatbot inside of ChatGPT with an external storage attached to it. And at this point, I also want to point out that this video is sponsored by Make. They approached us to do a video of the product, and we were very excited to actually do that because we did not build this automation for the collaboration. We built it because we thought it was really unique and we were going to teach it in our community before they even approached us, because we like teaching automations in Make, as we find that it hits the perfect balance for beginners. Now again, not a beginner automation, but don't worry, I have my trusty iPad here. I'll do my very best to explain the theory, and then we're going to do a step-by-step, which is also going to include me giving you everything to copy-paste, including the Make blueprint. But because we're working with JSON objects and Notion databases and everything here, you can start by importing my blueprint, which you can also find in the description below. But then you'll have to reconnect everything, but it might be a good starting point to leave less room for errors. So with that being said, let's have a closer look at what we're about to build here. Okay, so let's begin by talking about what you need to actually accomplish this. As I mentioned, this is no beginner automation, but the tools involved are quite simple and very similar to many of the tutorials we already did on this channel. First of all, we'll be using a GPT inside of ChatGPT running on their newest model, GPT-5. Those are only accessible on the premium plan, which starts at $20 a month. Then you will need a Make account, and a free account will totally suffice for this. If you like the automation, want to keep using it, you can upgrade to build out more on your account, but for the sake of this tutorial, you only need to sign up for the free account. And then lastly, to store our data here, we'll be using Notion, as it's a free software that allows you to get going here without paying for something like Airtable. And in my experience, if you're automating, it does work better than something like Google Sheets. In terms of setup of all these free, it's quite simple. ChatGPT, let's be real, if you're watching this channel, you probably have an account already. With Make, you can use the first link in the description to get started for free, which in my experience, it's usually the easiest to just log in with your Google account. And with Notion, it's the same deal. You can just sign up for free, but in the video, we'll be setting up a connection. So what I want you to do now in preparation is copy over this journal GPT template that we prepared for you into your own Notion account. You simply go to the link in the description. It is completely free. It's just a database template, and you simply go on here and click duplicate, which will allow you to add it to your workspace like so. By clicking this, I've added this to my private workspace, and those are all our prerequisites. So with that being said, we're ready to look at how to build this automation, but I want to do one thing before we do that, and that's because we're exploring some new and more advanced concepts than what we've done previously on this channel. And for that, I want to take some time to actually talk about them. So look, if you're already familiar with what webhooks are and how they function and what JSONs are, feel free to skip this section. We put timestamps down below so you can get to the practical implementation part. But in case you could use a refresher, which from my experience, most people working with these things, unless you're a seasoned programmer, a refresher like this can be really useful. Or you're not familiar at all, well, let me clear my iPad here and explain these two absolutely essential concepts in automation and development that if you're going to be building automations like this, you just need to know. And I promise I'll keep it as concise as I can, okay? So first up, webhooks. What is a webhook? Well, you can essentially think of the concept of a webhook as a tool that enables communication between two applications. So I'm going to employ my advanced drawing skills here. So if we have app number 1 over here and app number 2 over here, all right, that's actually not so bad. If app number 1 fires a webhook, okay, that's my illustration of a signal, well, that webhook is going to have a unique ID. It's very similar to API key, which it's going to be looking for. So let's say in this case, the webhook is named Peanut1. I don't know why Peanut1, I just came up with that. So if app 1 is firing and saying, hey, I'm firing a webhook with the name Peanut1, and app number 2 is actively looking for Peanut1, and then it hits the exact webhook and it sees that webhook says peanut1, then it allows for these two to connect and exchange data. I think that's a pretty good way of explaining it, actually. So practically, the webhook is not going to be called peanut1, but it's going to be something like CG7YIKS3, etc. And the make is going to be scanning for this exact webhook, and we're going to set up our GPT to be sending that exact webhook whenever the user decides that he finished his journal entry for the day. So in our illustration, this is Make, this is the journaling GPT, and we will be sending this package over. I'll make it look like a document. Let's see how I do. And this document is going to be a JSON. And if you're not familiar with JSONs, that's completely fine. You can just think of it as PDFs are made for humans and JSONs are made for computers. It's just a different format that makes it really easily readable for programs, so nothing gets lost as we send it through the webhook. And this JSON will have a very specific format. For this, I will open a new page and we'll be setting this exact format that we'll be sending over up in the very first step in our automation. And what the so-called data structure within the JSON will contain is the following items: an action, a note, and then just so you know, within the note we'll have sub items. This is the stuff we're going to store in our database, which is going to make this journal real nice and convenient. We'll be storing another date, a title, the actual content of your journal entry, the mood of the day, tags, and one more called note ID. And then two dates, from date and to date. So to sum up, we're going to be sending this JSON with all the details of your journal entry, including the mood, date, the actual journal entry, and more via webhook to our automation, which will make sure everything is safely placed within our database. So that's the theory. Now let's get into the step-by-step of actually setting this up. Okay, so our setup is going to begin inside of ChatGPT. We're going to be setting up this GPT, then we'll move into Make to get the database and all the connections right, and finally we'll finish the GPT. So what I need you to do is inside of the ChatGPT account, go over to GPTs, on the top right say create, and then you can pull up this page from the description of this video called Journal GPT Setup, and we just pre-filled some of the fields here that you'll be copying over. So for the name, you can call this Journal GPT. Here's a quick description of what it does. For the instructions, we carefully crafted this over many iterations. Feel free to customize it, but this is what we came up with. Simply copy, paste this into the instructions here. And as we're right here, I need you to customize one thing right now. This is important, otherwise it won't work. Here on the time zone, just replace this user time zone. So in my case, I'm gonna say Lisbon/Europe. You can just do this format of city/continent, and it's gonna work every time. And then for conversation starter, a simple let's begin will do. We have no knowledge files. And as a recommended model from our testing already, we found that GPT-5 actually works best here. And that is for the reason of its instruction following being the best amongst all OpenAI models, meaning that these detailed instructions, they include a lot of nuance and details, and GPT-5 simply follows these the best. And that's why it's the best choice here. We want this to work reliably. For capabilities, we'll turn everything on, including the code interpreter and data analysis. And then that concludes our initial setup. After we're done with the make part, we will come back here to create the new action. But to do this, we need the webhook details that we'll be creating within the make automation. And that's why we're gonna leave this right here. Maybe one more thing, I'm just gonna generate the image with DALL-E. And with that being said, we're ready to move on into the make part, which will be a bit more technical, but this tutorial will document every click, so you have a chance of recreating this from scratch yourself. Okay, now inside of make, we will start with a webhook, as that is what will be triggering our automation here, which is essentially gonna be the middle part between the GPT and our database. And our journey starts within our account. Under scenarios here, I will create a brand new scenario. And then as we explained what we're actually gonna be doing here in the illustrations with the iPad, in the last segment, we can move through this a bit quicker. First, we'll be adding the webhook, and here you want a custom webhook. So we can create a brand new one by clicking add, and I'm gonna say my journal tutorial webhook. I'm gonna add an API key here just to make this thing secure. I'm gonna also add that, change the name to my tutorial API key. And here you can really make this as simple or as complicated as you want to. For this tutorial, I will simply say tutorial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Create this, and now that's the password to my webhook. Let's make sure that not everybody on the internet can just start using this. When I click show advanced settings, it will allow me to add a data structure here. And as I mentioned, we're gonna be sending a very specific type of data structure across here, because we don't just wanna capture the message, we wanna capture a whole bunch of information from our journal to actually store that in our database. Again, if any of this confuses you, make sure to check out the explanation section where you also got to enjoy my drawing skills. So for data structure, we'll also be adding a brand new data structure. structure, and I'll just say my tutorial data structure. And here I will be adding a specification, and this is where we'll be adding all the objects we discussed. This is the type of thing that you don't really need to understand in depth right now. You can kind of just follow along this tutorial and do exactly what I do. And then by using this, you will kind of understand how it goes from GPT to database through what we do right here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the fields we discussed earlier. So the first one is an action. The type is text here. And I want to make this one required actually, which means it's always expecting it. What I like to do is I always like to close these down after I finish them. It just maintains my overview. I'm going to add another one. The next one is node. Type is collection. This one is also required. And then within the node, I'm actually going to have multiple sub items. So in this specification, I'm going to say add item. Just say date. This type I'm changing to date, also required. Collapse this. We want the title, which is text, also required. Then we want content, which is text, also required. Mood, which is a text, and this one is actually not required, meaning it's optional. Tags, and just make sure to switch tags to an array right here. This will allow us to create a tagging system within our Notion database, which is kind of a neat feature because then you're going to be able to return to some of your journal entries later down the line really easily. Not required. Okay, so we added tags, and then we're also going to add one called node_ID. Keep it as text, it's not required, and we can move on to the next one. And actually, I want to change one thing, which is the node is actually not required here. It only needs the action to work. I mean, this is not going to make a practical difference, but just bear with me as we set this up step by step, and then you can use it and tweak it to your liking. So I can close out the node, and then we need two last fields to round this out. One of it is going to be from_date. I'm going to change the type to date, and then to_date. The type is also date and also not required. Okay, so we're done here. I'm gonna save this data structure. And I know that might have been a lot, but honestly, you don't need a deep understanding of this. Just follow along and it's gonna make this app work, and then you can do your thing later on. So as you can see, this is already looking for the webhook right here. Right now, we're not sending any, so we can just move on to the next step, which in our case is going to be our router. So under flow control, there's these routers which allow you to set up different scenarios in the automation. In total, we want 4 of these, so I'm just gonna click plus twice, but a lot of it is gonna be identical. So let's just starting out by building one, which is our Notion step. And we'll set up this Notion step in just a second here. But before we do that, we have to define when this automation should go down this particular path, as we'll have 4 of these in the end. The way you do that is you click this wrench right here, you say set up a filter, and right here you can pick when it will go down this first path. So I wanted to go down this first path when the action from the webhook equals to create node. This is what we set up inside of the GPT to send through the webhook. So whenever it wants to create a new node, it will send exactly this, create node. You can review that within the GPT prompt. And then I can also label it. And now this very first path will happen if we want to create a new node. Okay, now we're ready to start building out this path with the Notion step. Now to do that, if you've never worked with Notion Make before, we have to do a setup one time. This takes a few steps. So if you have a connection like me here, you could pick that, but I'm gonna go through this with you step by step just to make sure that everybody can do this while following the tutorial. So you're gonna say add, and then here you're gonna say Notion internal. I'm just gonna call this the Notion internal tutorial connection. And then it wants this internal integration token right here. And the way to get that is if I go over to my Notion and I'm on my database here, the journal GPT that we copied over in the beginning, you can click the 3 dots, go here into connections and say manage connections. And then all the way at the bottom, you want to go to develop or manage integrations. This will open up a new browser tab in which you can just click new integration. You name it. So we're going to say journal GPT tutorial connection. To make this super clear, this is the Notion workspace I'm in. It's an internal connection, and that is it. I just say save right here. And when I click configure integration settings, this is set up and we see our internal integration secret right here. I'm just going to show it and copy it over here and paste it right now. When I save this, there's one last step we need to do to actually make this work, and this couldn't be any simpler. Back inside of the Notion database, you click the 3 dots again, and now if you go under connections, if I look for tutorial, you're gonna see the journal GPT tutorial connection. If I select this and confirm, we're all done. Our database is hooked up to the automation, which will allow us to put anything we want inside of that database from here on out. And if you ever use Make Again, you don't have to go through this process again. It's set up and you can just pick your connection from this list and it's right there. So that's the connection. Now we just have to tell Make which database we want to edit things in. Select from the list is fine. And for database ID, it's actually really simple. You just have to look for the name. So journal GPT, we don't have to spell out the full thing, and click OK. And it should find it automatically. That's it right there. Okay, so you can already see some of the tags that are in the database pop up here, but we won't actually be needing those because now it's time to hook up the data we got from the GPT and put it in the right place in the database. So we're gonna start up top here with the title inside of the node. That's this title right here. For tags, we actually want to map. So you flip this little switch and then you select tags. For content, we pick content. For mood, we wanna flip map again and we pick the mood. And for the start time, we have to do a little trick here. And I have to admit, while we built this automation, we actually used ChatGPT to exactly give us the right thing to write here. But essentially, you have to look for parse date, which will allow you to reformat the date into a format that Notion will accept seamlessly. These are intermediate to advanced operations, which you can do with all of your data to essentially transform it from one format into another. In this case, we're going to be transforming it from the format that GPT gives us into a format that Notion wants. So we're going to be parsing this date. We're going to be filling in two things in the brackets here. So first up right here, we want the date that we passed from the node here. And then in the second part, you can just put in X and this will work. Just trust me on this. And in the end, we say include time, yes. And voila, that is the Notion step. Now, I know this is becoming a lot of step-by-step following, but hey, that's how it is when you get into things that go beyond the basics. Just super quick anecdote and we'll get back to it. I remember back in the day when I was learning Photoshop and I went through some of these tutorials where for 5 minutes straight, it was just, well, you set this slider to 74 and this slider to 14.5. And then the Gaussian blur settings should be these 5 exact settings. And you kind of just followed it, hit enter, but then the damn thing worked and it felt like magic and it gave you that motivation to actually go ahead and learn about these steps. And I hope this tutorial does the same. So if you feel a bit confused, don't worry, it's completely normal when you're pushing beyond the boundaries of your knowledge. And hopefully I'm doing good enough of a job of explaining this so you can follow along well. And then the whole thing works. And then you can learn exactly about parsing dates later on if you feel like it. So for the next step, we need to create a JSON object right here, which we can do by clicking plus, JSON, and then create JSON. We'll be doing this with the Igor diary node data structure. So it's important to select that. And here we're going to be pre-selecting the corresponding fields. And most of them are going to come from these properties values down here. So for the date, we want properties values and then date. And then I want you to select the start. And then on the title, we want to open it up and use the plain text title. That's just the title without any formatting. That's what we want here. For content, we again want to go into content, plain text. Beautiful. For mood, we take the name of the mood. And for tags, we'll be adding an item. And then in here, you actually want to use the map function to make this work properly. And in the first part of this mapping function, you want the whole list of tags. This is a programming specific thing, but if you have these two brackets in the end, you know it's a list, so it can contain multiple tags. And then in the second half, we want the name of the tag. So just select the name right here. And then finally, for the node ID, we want to go all the way to the top and use the database item ID. And this will allow us to identify which item in the database it exactly is as we pass this JSON around. Okay, so that rounds out this step. You don't have to understand all of that. All I need you to know is that this is sort of the package that helps us communicate between the GPT and the database. Okay, and as we have the complete JSON that contains all the data we need, we can add one final step here, which is a webhook. And you're just gonna paste in this custom code here, where the response type is single note, and then the single note is the JSON that we created in this string. So I'm gonna go in here and just link that like so, say save. And that is really the first branch complete. So to recap, if ever the GPT is gonna be sending out a webhook via its actions, this automation will catch it, decide what type of webhook that was. And if that webhook is saying we should create a node, then it will go into our database, create a new database item, reformat the data it got into a beautiful JSON, and then fire another webhook, which the GPT can then again catch to continue working. Now, we need a few different routes because not in every case are we creating a brand new node, right? As I told you, we also want the GPT to be able to pick up the last nodes from the database. So it's not just writing, but also reading. And for that, we have some other routes here. So in the second route, what we want to happen is the action to exactly match update node, because the GPT also has the ability to change the database entries. I'll also name it that, so it's nicely visible on here. And then we want another Notion action this time, because this is about updating. We're going to be updating the database item. All we need is a quick search. And if I look for journal, and if I just type in the first letters of the database name again, we link it up here. For the ID, we're going to be using the node ID right here. For the title, we got the title. Tags, we're mapping and giving it the tags. Content is content. Mood, again, we're mapping, giving it the mood. And for the date, we'll have to do the same little trick as before, where we're parsing the date to make it the right format. First part is date, second part is yet again X, just like before. And then finally we need to set include time to yes for this to work reliably. Say save, then we need to create another JSON. So JSON, create JSON. And then here I can already choose the data structure, which is gonna be Igor's diary node. And here we'll be using data from the latest step, the Notion action that updates. So for the date, we wanna use the date start. For the title in plain text. For the content in plain text. For the mood, we want the name of the mood. And we'll be mapping the tags. And you need to use this mapping function here for this to work. And all the way at the bottom, the properties value, as with the others, we just give it the tags, which is an array. And that essentially means it's a list of all the tags. And here you just type name. And for node ID, finally, we give it the database item ID, click save, and the JSON is set up. And then we round this out with another webhook. Insert the webhook. We can keep the single node because that's what we're sending here again. It's just a single piece of data, but then the node changed. So as you see, I copy pasted that over from the first webhook and it was still linking to this JSON, which was indicated by the number 4. You have to be careful with little details like this. Single node is the new JSON, which you can see here by the number 10. So I'm just gonna click that, save, and now it sends the webhook with this JSON. Okay, 2 more paths and we got this. So the next path is yet again gonna be determined by the action, but this time we want to get the nodes. Also adding that as a label. If you've been following closely, this will hopefully make sense. Get nodes is to retrieve the nodes when the GPT gets engaged. This first one was for writing a new database item. The second one is for updating an existing database item. And this one is just to fetch one of the previous database items. So the Notion action therefore is going to be search objects because we need to find one of the database items. Again, we can just link up the database by looking for the name of it, journal, say, okay. Beautiful, there it is. And then we can up this limit to 100 in case you're going to be using this a lot and you want to look over a total of up to 100 entries. But on this one, we actually have to use the filter because we don't want to look at every single database item. As I said, this GPT is set up to only look at the journal entries from the past week. So here you could change that. But to only look at the past week, we need to set up a filter. And we're going to be filtering for the date. So I'll set up the filter for the date. And then if I do that, there's this option in here that says date on or after. Okay, and when we select this date, as before, we again need to parse this date to get it into the format that works with Notion here. So in the first part, we're gonna do the from date, and in the second part, just the X as before. Again, this just changes the formatting so that Notion can actually read it. And we add a and rule here, and now we wanna go to date, but this time we want date on or before. This allows us to create a little date range for all the nodes between 2 dates. Just like before, we need to parse the date so Notion can read it. And here we'll be taking the to date and the X here. And this will filter for all the nodes between this date and this date. Save that filter just like that. Okay, then we need another JSON. So I'm just gonna pick this Notion step, take the Igor diary node. And then from the Notion step, we're putting the data into here, just like with the previous 2 paths. Date start, I want the title in plain text. I want the content in plain text. I want the mood name. And for the tags, we want to use the map function here, like so. And then here we want the tags and the name. And then for node ID, we want to use the page ID. Amazing. We're really getting close to actually making this work. While we tested this, there is one error that could occur here, which is if there's nothing in your database, this step will throw an error. So the way we can handle that in here is by right-clicking this JSON, saying add error handler, resume. And then here you just want to enter square brackets, which means this is an empty list. So in this case, we'll keep everything working as it will return an empty list in case there's nothing in the database, which can happen. Okay, and then we round out this one with another webhook response. I'm just going to copy this over from the other one. But here we actually got to change 3 things. This and this right here, because it's not a single node anymore. We filtered for multiple nodes. So say nodes right here, nodes right here. And then here you want to pick the correct JSON, the JSON from step 14, and save this out because we want to send this one through the webhook. Because when we looked inside of the Notion database and searched for date range, if it's multiple days, it can return more than 1 node. So it's not the same thing as a single node before. Okay, let's finish the last path, which will round out the automation. This one is going to be all about getting the tags, which honestly, with the journaling example here is kind of a nice to have. But if you rebuild this automation to do other things, having things tagged can be extremely useful, sometimes even mission critical. So this is how you do it. You set up this route to get the tags. We'll add a Notion step. This time we want to get a database, the same database as before. Click save. And then we want one last webhook which is going to be a webhook response. And then this one we need to customize a little bit. So the response type is tags. And then all the tags we want to pass on as a list, which we do by giving these square brackets, which creates a list. And then inside the square brackets, we want the map function like so. And then right here in the first part of the map function, I want the tags, but I want the list here under options, all the options we have. And then in the second part, we just say name, click save, and that is it right there. That is the full step-by-step on how to build this automation that can now be customized for so many different use cases. But we're gonna finish out our journaling GPT here by heading back over into ChatGPT and now hooking this automation up with the GPT. So previously we finished all the other fields here except of the action, and the action is what's going to be communicating with the automation here. So let's create a new action. And then what you want to do here is take the Notion page I gave to you. And then here at the bottom, you can see JSON, and you can copy this by clicking copy. And this entire JSON is what links this to the automation. All the things we set up in there is specified in this JSON. So you can see there's different mood types. It either sends single notes or notes. All the things that we set up in the automation is in here. So all I do is copy and paste that JSON in here. And then I just need to fill out one single thing right here where it says webhook URL. This is essential. This is where we connect it. Remember what I explained to you, that we're going to be firing a webhook with the GPT, which the automation is going to be listening for? Well, this is the listening step right here. And it's listening for this very specific URL. So I'm going to copy this address to the clipboard, head back over to my GPT and paste that in here. And make sure nothing gets lost here, right? In this case, when I pasted it, it actually deleted the second quotation mark. So I absolutely want to preserve that. Otherwise, it won't work. So it's URL in quotation marks, colon, space, quotation mark, then the URL, then the quotation marks. If you do this, you should see a check diary action pop up here. And this is what's going to be linking our GPT to the automation, to the database, and backwards. Okay, there's one more thing, because to make this extra secure, we did set up a API key. So you need to go to authentication up here and actually set it up to, otherwise it won't be able to speak to each other. It's like a password for the communication here. So auth type, I'm gonna set to custom. And remember right here, we set this up, my tutorial API key. And actually, to be fair, I already forgot what I set this to. So I'm just gonna set a new one and remove the first one. I'm gonna call this my second tutorial API key. The value is gonna be tutorial 12345. Actually, thinking back, that might have been what I said. For this tutorial, I will simply say tutorial 12345. Anyway, what I wanna do here is copy this right here. Send the API key using the xmake API key HTTP header. That is what it wants down here, the custom header name. So I'm gonna paste that in here. And then the API key was tutorial 12345. Save. We're done. Would you believe that? So let's create the GPT, but I actually wanna only create this one for myself. So that concludes the GPT setup, but I have to do one more thing in the make automation, and I have to turn this on immediately as data arrives. And for that to work, I actually need to save the changes here. This had some unsaved changes. Okay, we can fix that. Run scenario immediately. And now this is running and listening. And now if we go into a brand new conversation with the GPT and say, let's begin, it will fetch our latest journal entries and all of our tags. And you will see that it will be engaging me with a custom message that is based on what is in my database, where I talk about development and paddle. And then here it's talking to me as if it knew, because it does. And if I share a new message, I can say save the database, and I'll just pull over the Notion database here, because you will see it using the action up here, and voila, it populates into the database. And this way you can set up a two-way connection straight from within ChatGPT to access an external database as your very own storage. As mentioned before, I also included a blueprint to this entire scenario, so you can just go in here and make, say, more, import blueprint, and then bring the whole automation in, but you will have to reconnect everything one by one to your own accounts. But this way you at least have a starting point where less can go wrong. So if you want to try this out for yourself, you could get 1 month of Make for free from the first link in the video's description below. And that's it for today. Something a bit more in depth, a bit more advanced. The options are vast here. You could really customize this to do many other things. And that interface of being within ChatGPT is something that over 80% of the users will resonate with, because it is the most popular LLM platform in the world. And now you know how to extend it with external memory. All right, my name is Igor, and I hope you have a wonderful day.